Thank you all for this opportunity to make some comments about the needed road to nuclear disarmament. I regret that my many responsibilities as an Archbishop have prevented me from attending in person. Nevertheless, I am privileged to have your esteemed company through this recording. May God bless all of you and give you the strength to persevere in this most important work. I want to talk about how our collective road to nuclear disarmament must be built upon productive relationships. To help illustrate this by personal example, I want to thank 3 people who I understand are at this conference. But first, my own committed journey on the road to nuclear disarmament began with the local team supporting me in the writing of my pastoral letter, Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a conversation toward nuclear disarmament. I hope you have read or will read my pastoral letter and reflect upon it. I felt compelled to write it given that the birthplace of nuclear weapons is within my own Archdiocese of Santa Fe. Pope Francis has declared that even the mere possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. I've come to deeply believe that the possession of nuclear weapons by anyone is a threat to all. It has to be understood that nuclear weapons are a class of weapons unto themselves. This is because of their scale of lethality and residual effects, such as radioactivity, that can harm generations. Nuclear weapons are deeply immoral because of their indiscriminate killing of women, children, non-combatants, the old, the newborn, and the infirm. It is my belief that the Catholic Church, however imperfectly following the example of our Savior Jesus Christ, should take up nuclear disarmament as a critical pro-life issue. Isn't that common sense when one nuclear weapon can kill millions and inflict incalculable suffering on the wounded living? Turning back to my pastoral letter, the cohesiveness of my writing team and the letter itself are testament to the value of productive relationships. I could not have done it by myself. In that vein, I want to specifically thank Father Peter Kang, Director of the Institute for Peace and Cooperation in Northeast Asia, who took it upon himself to see that my pastoral letter was translated into Korean and Japanese. Thank you so much, Father Kang, for helping to internationally extend its reach. I also want to thank the Archbishop Emeritus of Nagasaki, Joseph Muswaki Takami, and the Bishop of Hiroshima, Alexis Mitsuru Shirahama, who I believe are here at this conference. I give them and Nagasaki Archbishop Peter Nakamura my deepest thanks for the tender and loving hospitality they extended to me, my fellow traveler, Archbishop Paul Aitchen, Archbishop of Seattle, and our staff during our recent pilgrimage to Japan to commemorate the 78th anniversary of the atomic bombings. This too is a story of relationships, where the 4 dioceses of Santa Fe, Seattle, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki entered into a formal partnership to work on nuclear disarmament. We released a statement from Nagasaki on August 9th, the 78th atomic bombing anniversary, expressing explicit support for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which the Vatican was the first nation-state to sign and ratify. Archbishop Emeritus Takami and Bishop Shirahama, I will always cherish our new partnership and friendship and the excellent hospitality that you showed. I am already thinking of returning in August 2025 for the 80th anniversaries of the atomic bombings, by which time we should all strive for concrete and measurable progress toward nuclear disarmament. While in Japan, I had the honor of meeting some of the atomic bomb survivors, the Hibakusha. I have also had the honor of giving a healing ceremony in my own archdiocese for the generations of downwinders that have suffered from the Trinity test, which began the atomic age. I quote what President Reagan said to the Soviet Union some 40 years ago: "A nuclear war can never be won and must not be fought," which President Biden repeated at the United Nations last year. I assert that the only way to guarantee no nuclear war is to get rid of nuclear weapons. I want to quote a man much smarter than me. After the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Albert Einstein said, "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything, save our modes of thinking, and we thus drift toward unparalleled catastrophe. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of mankind," end quote. He further said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." He added, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. So let us combine our faith in science and wisdom and compassion to purify our hearts, bring resolve to our minds, and work toward nuclear disarmament." But let us address why relationships are important in working toward nuclear disarmament. That may seem like an obvious matter given that human beings are by nature social animals. But numbers matter, and numbers are what politicians respond to. We have to move politicians if we are ever to bring about a future world free of nuclear weapons. And the only way you can build a movement is through relationships. Why do we need to do this? The best historic example I can think of is that Ronald Reagan was an ardent Cold War warrior in his first term as president. But in his second term, he turned into a nuclear weapons abolitionist. That didn't happen out of nowhere. One major reason for his conversion was that 1 million people marched in Central Park in New York City protesting the dangers of the Cold War. You may recall that Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev came tantalizingly close to signing a nuclear weapons ban treaty in 1988, only to have it undone by Reagan's pipe dream of building a ballistic missile defense that came to be popularly known as Star Wars. Now, 35 years and a couple of hundreds of billions of dollars later, we still have nothing that will protect us from nuclear war. Instead, the sad fact is that we are falling backwards with Putin's and Kim Jong-un's nuclear threats and the massive so-called modernization programs of the nuclear powers. What should we do? We must build enduring relationships that work on nuclear disarmament. I go back to the formal partnership that the Diocese of Santa Fe, Seattle, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki formally established. In keeping with this conference's stated objective of strengthening the solidarity between the U.S., Korea, and Japan's bishops' conferences to promote peace on Northeast Asia, I suggest broadening that partnership to include other dioceses in our 3 countries. Further, we should work to institutionalize nuclear disarmament as a critical pro-life issue in the Catholic Church. On a secular level, I note that there is a total of 193 countries that are member states of the United Nations, plus 2 nation states with observer status. One of those observer states is the Vatican, which was the first to sign and ratify the ban treaty. In fact, the Vatican was at the center of the lead up to the ban treaty, playing a strong role in promoting international examination of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. That process led to the actual drafting of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Out of the 193 member states in the United Nations, 122 nation states voted in favor of opening the ban treaty for signatures in July of 2017. Since then, 93 countries have signed the ban treaty, and 69 have ratified it, with more signing over time. We need only 4 more countries to sign on before we can say that a majority of all nation states have done so. This is true building of international relationships, outlawing the deadliest of all weapons of mass destruction. This is something that common sense says should be the international norm, since chemical and biological weapons have already been banned for decades. Of course, a skeptic can justifiably state that what really counts is to have the nuclear powers sign on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Not surprisingly, The nuclear weapons states have opposed the ban treaty from the very beginning, with the U.S. ambassador and the foreign ministers of the United Kingdom and France denouncing the ban treaty in a staged press conference just outside of the United Nations. While there, U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley, now Republican Party candidate for president, declared that the U.S. and its allies viewed their nuclear stockpiles as critical, irreplaceable security assets, and that North Korea's nuclear ambitions made global disarmament talks totally impractical. The British and French foreign ministers claimed that their countries remained committed to nuclear anti-proliferation through other international venues. But what other credible international frameworks are there given the repeated failures of the last 3 review conferences of non-proliferation treaty to bring about any progress toward nuclear disarmament whatsoever? Remember that more than a half-century ago, the nuclear weapons powers promised to enter into serious negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament, in exchange for which the non-weapon states promised to never acquire them. The nuclear weapon states have never even begun to honor that solemn commitment. There are now 9 nuclear weapon states. In addition, there are 31 NATO countries plus South Korea, Japan, and Australia under the United States' so-called extended nuclear deterrence. None of them have signed the ban treaty. To bring this home to this conference for peace in Northeast Asia, a concrete step that South Korean and Japanese citizens could take to accelerate progress toward nuclear disarmament is to pressure their governments to at least send observers to future meetings of state parties to the ban treaty. As precedent, there has been one crack in the NATO alliance in that Dutch citizens compelled the government of the Netherlands to observe the first meeting of the state's parties. I am urging my South Korean and Japanese brothers and sisters to demand the same of their governments. I'll even observe that the likelihood of successfully doing so is higher in Japan, and August 2025, the 80th atomic bombing anniversaries, should be the target date for just that. But why do that here in South Korea when there is an imminent nuclear threat from the north? To answer that, we must first step back and question the very nature of so-called deterrence. Why is it that both Russia and the US have thousands of nuclear weapons instead of just a few hundred needed for just deterrence? Why are all the major nuclear weapons powers undergoing massive so-called modernization programs that will completely rebuild their existing nuclear weapons and produce new designs, plus buy new missiles, submarines, and bombers to deliver them? Why is it that Russia, China, and the United States are all expanding their test sites when their nuclear weapons have already been extensively tested? The answer is that this is not just mere deterrence, but instead is a hybrid of deterrence and nuclear warfighting capabilities that can destroy civilizations. To understand this, I specifically recommend reading The Doomsday Machine by the recently deceased Daniel Ellsberg, the ex-nuclear strategist turned famous whistleblower. Nuclear warfighting is simply not acceptable when, for example, 6 years ago, President Trump threatened North Korea with fire and fury like the world has never seen. Do I have to spell out what that would mean for the Korean Peninsula? Do I have to spell out what Putin's nuclear threats over Ukraine would really mean if carried out? I can say that I have some grasp of the utter horror because the bishops of Hiroshima and Nagasaki took me to their atomic bombing memorial museums. Both the horror today would be vastly bigger given the utter destructiveness of modern thermonuclear weapons. We must work diligently through our relationships to avert nuclear war. I note the increasing nuclear threats from Kim Jong-un, responded to by President Yoon Suk Yeol on your country's 75th Armed Forces Day. He said that North Korea's threats to use nuclear weapons pose an existential threat to the people of South Korea and a major challenge to global peace. while also threatening that South Korea could end the North Korea regime. President Yoon Suk Yeol also referred to the Nuclear Consultative Group, formed with Japan and the United States earlier this year to strengthen trilateral military cooperation. But where does this end? More than 70 years ago, your country was ripped apart and is still yet to be rejoined and made whole. No matter what you think of the North Korean regime, would it not make sense to at least sign a peace treaty that recognizes the end of military hostilities from a time as long ago as I am old? Couldn't a peace treaty be a stepping stone toward peace and reconciliation that would cause neither country harm? Surely it is not too much to ask for, and surely it is better than the status quo, which is the escalating buildup of nuclear tensions that could inflame the entire world. We need to sustain a serious global conversation about universal, verifiable nuclear disarmament. We can no longer deny or ignore the dangerous predicament we have created for ourselves with a new nuclear arms race. This new arms race is arguably more dangerous than the past Cold War because of multiple nuclear actors and the rise of cyber and hypersonic weapons and artificial intelligence. A nuclear arms race is inherently self-perpetuating, a vicious spiral that prompts progressively destabilizing actions and reactions by all parties. We need nuclear arms control, not an escalating nuclear arms race. Further, we need to figure out concrete steps toward abolishing nuclear weapons and permanently ending the nuclear threat. If we care about humanity, if we care about our planet, if we care about the God of peace and human conscience, then we must start a public conversation on these urgent questions and find a new path toward nuclear disarmament. Pope Francis has made clear statements about the immorality of possessing nuclear weapons, moving the Church from past conditional acceptance of deterrence to the moral imperative of abolition. Moreover, we are robbing from the poor and needy with current plans to spend vast sums of money to keep them forever. The Catholic Church has a long history of speaking out against nuclear weapons. In recent years, Pope Francis has led the Church in a dramatic shift away from conditionally supporting deterrence to denouncing nuclear weapons as immoral and calling for their complete abolition. As Pope Francis declared, quote, "We must never grow weary of working to support the principal international legal instruments of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, including the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons," end quote. I consider it to be the duty of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, the birthplace of nuclear weapons, to support the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty while working toward universal, verifiable nuclear disarmament. In late November, I will travel to the United Nations in New York City to witness the second meeting of the state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I encourage my peers and senior Catholic leadership to do so as well. There, we can join the nuncio at the United Nations to support the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty that the Vatican was the first to sign and ratify. Our growing presence will exert more pressure on the nuclear weapons powers to eventually honor that ban treaty, just as they have for earlier treaties banning chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction. In closing, I have shared Pope Francis's call for nuclear disarmament based on the gospel teachings of Jesus on peacemaking, nonviolence, and universal love. I propose that we now move on to nuclear disarmament itself, that we might heed Pope Francis's call to take new steps to end the production and maintenance of nuclear armaments and create a new future without nuclear weapons. Jesus came into the world as the true light. He came to lead us out of the darkness of violence, death, and destruction. His light is the exact opposite of the searing light of a nuclear weapon. His light is the true light of universal love and compassion. His light of peace enables us to see a way forward on the path of life to a world without nuclear weapons. But it is not enough that we become instruments of peace, as important as that is. No, we must take up the cause of worldwide nuclear disarmament with an urgency that befits the seriousness of this cause and the dangerous threat that looms over all of humanity and the planet. I call upon all of us to take up the challenge of nuclear disarmament by engaging in the vital discussion and building relationships that lead to concrete action steps toward this noble goal. Thank you very, very much. Your brother in the light of Christ's peace.